Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So we'll give it just a couple more minutes. I have to say, I'm always very impressed. Interpreters are always on time, understanding how important it is to be there when scheduled. So we'll just give it another minute. Sometimes people have tech problems and such. And then we'll go ahead and start. We're very fortunate to have the Director General with us, and we also have Dr. Jalul, since we may want to have some discussion about some of the health issues that have been going on. So we really appreciate both their presences.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder, we are recording this meeting, and what we'll do is if there's any questions that we're not able to answer at the meeting, we'll go ahead and provide that information available later. So that's what we do. And again, you all are very familiar with hybrid meetings in general. What we'll do is, if you wish to use the chat, I personally love the chat. Some people find the chat very distracting during presentations. If there are questions during the presentation and you'd like to just pose them, go ahead and put them into the chat, and we'll either pick them up at the end or try to answer them throughout the presentation. Otherwise, there'll be a chance to do regular question and answer at the end. When we do Q&As, as usual, just raise your hand in Teams, and we'll call on people. It should be in the order that they show up, and we'll have an opportunity there. So, all right. So we're at 1:16. So. I think why don't we just go ahead and get started. I see we have a number of people. Again, as I said, the meeting will be recorded, so if your customer colleagues who weren't able to join, we'll be able to share the recording with them afterwards. So if you don't, so go ahead. So Director General, if I could offer you the floor.
Thank you, Kira. Good afternoon, everybody. I am really pleased to have this opportunity to participate in this service-oriented town hall after we had a general town hall. And I would like to take this opportunity once again to thank you all for excellent work you've been doing always, but special thanks for the outstanding achievements during the pandemic, because really you were the first really to help us to bring United Nations office here in Geneva back to office, back to work. We resumed our activities practically the first in UN system, and it was because of your sacrifices, your dedication, and of course your professionalism. In my very brief introduction, I just want to concentrate on two issues, and both issues about the safety and security. First, safety and security of us as an office, as a biggest, one of the biggest conference centers in the world. Because what we see now is the understanding that, of course, all the member states, all the organizations want to resume physical meetings as soon as possible. But at the same time, the same member states, the same organizers are indicating that they consider that these should be in-person meetings with a hybrid ingredient. That the future is going to be hybrid, because everybody wants to be able to come and participate, but if they can't do so, to be able to get connected. And I personally think that the future of multilateral conferences is going to be hybrid. That means for us to remain and to strengthen our position as a conference provider is really important to be excellent in what we are doing today, providing hybrid services. And I think we have here huge opportunities, because we already have lots of experiences in traditional conferencing. We have gained lots of experience during this year. I think that Geneva is very, very placed to become one of the best providers for hybrid conferences. Of course, we need a mandate for the member states, and I'm always raising this issue when I'm meeting them. Of course, we need mandate and indications for the conference organizers. I always say that, of course, it has financial consequences for the budget, and not only for our budget, that we have to have investment for going on with having more rooms available for this type of activities, but we also need the member states themselves to invest in the equipment, in training, so the level of participation will be up to the level of necessity in order to provide the interpretation. I'm always raising this issue that the member states, if they want to retain these hybrid services in the future, they need to invest themselves into better Wi-Fi connection, in better equipment, in training, etc. So that's a huge enterprise. So I really want to share with you this vision and to try to have your support in order really to make the Geneva the center of excellency in this type of new conference. So we will be absolutely sure that the jobs, the role of Geneva is safe and secure. Second issue, again, about safe and security, but now about our personal safety and security in times of COVID. In types of hybrid conferences, I am following very attentively, together with my colleagues in DCM, the developments about the health situation with interpreters during their hybrid meetings. That's very, very important for us, and I would like to assure you that well-being of you, of all the staff, is crucial for us. We are not going to sacrifice it, and that's exactly very important to understand what are possible negative consequences and how we can really take care of all these challenges in order to prepare these hybrid conferences, if necessary, without sacrificing your well-being. And the second part is about vaccination. I really take this opportunity to encourage all of you who have not yet registered or received the vaccination to do so. Why I'm raising this issue now? Because we see and are monitoring very, very attentively the situation developing in New York. In New York, local authorities announced that no longer masks and social distance are necessary. So people will be back to office without masks and without social distances if there is such a decision of the local authorities. In New York, they consider that this is no longer necessary because 60% or even 70% of people were vaccinated, so the risk is minimal. But of course, the risk is much higher for those who were not vaccinated. And I would like to assure you that, of course, if there are medical situations which are not allowing you to get vaccinated, of course, we will take it into account and we'll look into the matters in order to accommodate you, to provide all the necessary security. But if it's not the case of the medical condition, I'm really asking you to register those who have not yet vaccinated. I know that many of us have already been vaccinated. I really would like to ask you to get vaccinated in case there is a decision of the host country really soon, and we might have such a decision at the end of summer, beginning of September, to go on with meeting without social distancing. I really want all of us to be protected. So I really would like to, I'm repeating it during each our meeting, but I really would like to confirm that, of course, vaccination is not obligatory, but it provides additional protection, lots of protection, and I really would like to encourage all of you to take care of your health, because here in Switzerland we have all the opportunities with the host country, and we know it's simple, it's working, it does not provide any negative consequence. So my brief introduction was all about safety and security in different dimensions of this word. And now I'm back to Kira for the conducting this town hall.
Thank you very much, DG, for your words. It's very much appreciated. Colleagues, I've dropped a note in the chat just as a reminder. Once you have been vaccinated, if you're doing that, please upload the certificate to the UN Earth Med system. It's a confidential system, and it's there, and that's very useful. So you have it there always for reference, and it also lets the medical team know that you have indeed been vaccinated. Those of us in management have no access to the EarthMed system, so we can't see anything in there, but that is a way for you to keep track of that. And that's very helpful because overall, somebody can take a look and say, okay, how many people in general have uploaded certificates? So that would be very helpful. Let's go ahead and switch to the presentation. Thanks very much, Gabriella, for putting that in there. I think that's very helpful. And as always, if you need assistance, Gabriella is the angel in your life who will help make things easier and assist with that. I've done my certificate. I got vaccinated. I have high blood pressure, so I was on the early group, so I uploaded my certificate. It wasn't too bad. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm just reiterating some of the points that the Director General had made, but I really, it's so impressive when I think back to March 2020, which is now kind of a long time ago. I remember leaving the building March 16th and with this whole, were we going to come back? What was going to happen? I mean, who knew, and many things stopped. So to the outsiders, to people who are, may say, meeting participants, permanent missions, it looked like the UN was doing nothing. But in those 3 months between mid-March and June, when UNCTAD had its first hybrid meeting, there was a huge amount of work going on. And I really want to thank everybody in the interpretation service for all the efforts that you made during that period. So there were lots of people working in the global working groups on hybrid meetings to figure out how are we even going to do this. There were people who took on additional responsibilities, and I'd like to specifically thank the people who worked on translating the UNOG annual report into Arabic, Chinese, Russian, and Spanish. That was great. That was the first year we were able to issue the annual report in all 6 languages. There were people who were doing training, people who were doing outreach. So there were many, many activities that were happening at that point. So thank you, everybody. But through all of that hard work, UNOG was able to resume official meetings with that UNCTAD meeting. And UNCTAD has always been a great partner there. As you may know, I am the project executive for the Indico project, and they've been working very well there as well. So starting in June, we began to have meetings again. Now, you know more than anybody how limited those meetings were. Why was this? Because we didn't have enough of an infrastructure, and that expanded over time. So we can see 4,274 meetings overall held in 2020. This is not that many. Normally we run about 10,000. So it was a big reduction. Of those meetings, 1,257 with interpretation, and of those about half were in virtual or hybrid format. So this was a big reduction. That said, that doesn't mean it wasn't more work. And in fact, one of the things we've learned from organizing hybrid meetings and the work with that is that actually hybrid meetings are more complicated from a backstage standpoint. And of course, you know better than anyone that they produce more, there's cognitive load issues. There's a lot of issues with hybrid meeting. From a meeting participant standpoint, there's a lot of conveniences, but those conveniences don't necessarily translate into our side. At any rate, the main point with this slide, I just wanted to say, again, thank you very much for all of your work on this. I would say UNOG has really been very much among the leaders of the UN in terms of hybrid meetings. And we still, however, are not having as many meetings as we had in the past. I'd also note that
parce que je sais pas ce qu'il faut dire.
Okay, the 46th session of the Human Rights Council also was held in hybrid format. This was brand new for them. Normally they managed just through careful timing to do everything in person in 2020, but the 46th session was actually held fully hybrid, and they were very satisfied with that. So there's some benefits from that, but again, there's always costs when it comes to hybrid. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to go into some of the divisional priorities just to share what we think really is important. First of all, ensuring funding sufficiency. Now, this is all drafted in UN speak, so it's all very kind of heavy sounding, but really the first point is just making sure that we have enough money to pay salaries and to meet our mandates. That's what we're talking about in item 1. 2, promoting staff well-being and development. Well, what is this about? We have a lot of ongoing challenges. Our work is evolving. Some of the changes, we've had to train people to be technical moderators to support hybrid meetings, and all of your work has changed very much with the hybrid work. So the question is, how do we respond to these evolving challenges while at the same time supporting staff to the best way possible? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Focusing on clients' needs. This is making sure that we talk to our clients, both the end users as meeting participants and the substantive secretariats who are organizing meetings, and say, all right, what is it that you need now? There's been a lot of work that was done with that in the context of fully hybrid meetings. As we begin to transition to the return to a more normal, but as the Director General said, we'll always be having some hybrid meetings, or at least some hybrid participation. Hopefully it'll be significantly reduced. We have to see how this evolves, but we want to understand from the clients, what is it that they need? What did they find useful? What did they not find useful? And I'll go into a little bit later how we're going to revive the conferencing today and tomorrow study that Corinne had done in 2019. But we should not make assumptions. We should actually ask people questions, find out what they're looking for. Item 4, drawing benefits from innovation, technology, data, and partnerships. If any of you had a chance to read the Secretary General's vision, he's putting forward 5 items, the quintet of change, 5 different things that he's looking forward. One of them, of course, is data, innovation, and communication. So this is also, of course, a priority for our division. We want to make sure that when we innovate, we're using these new tools smartly. We work together with others as we're doing that, and we're very much embedded in the global efforts that DGACM has been doing, as I think you're well aware. And then we want to make sure that we have actual data, that we have facts to help us making decisions. And by partnerships, again, it's always, we work together with other people. Item 5 is quite clear, mainstreaming multilingualism. I am fortunate to be the UNOG focal point for multilingualism. And with the hard work that Michelle Keating had done while she was focal point for multilingualism before I was appointed, we're creating a multilingualism action team. And some of you are members for that. And we're building it on the disability inclusion action team that UNOG has. But the idea is to say, all right, these 2 mandates, disability inclusion and multilingualism, extremely important for the organization. They're priorities, but they're unfunded priorities. It's not that we're able to hire a staff member and say, okay, you go forth and do multilingualism, or you go forth and do accessibility. So the idea is to mobilize resources, enthusiasm across the House. I'd like to take a moment to thank Gary Melander for his work in accessibility. He's been very much a champion on that and has done a lot of valuable work. And of course, that's, the man has a day job, as we all do. So we're trying to pull together people with enthusiasm, ideas, and energy and move forward with some concrete actions in both of these areas. Next slide, please. Now, I like this slide. It can be super intimidating because there's lots of stuff on it, but there's really only 4 things to look at. So the top line, the bright blue line, this is issuance compliance. And one of the things that this is not so much an issue for interpretation, but it is really an impressive achievement for our colleagues in docs management and in languages service. So this is comparing 2010 to 2020. So it's a 10-year span. You can see that at the start of the period, documents issuance was 50%. We have about 2018, and they were moving on it. The documents issuance rate is 100%. So this is an example of what happens when things are prioritized. There's always the tension between quality, cost, and timeliness. And probably really picking up in about 2016, a big emphasis was made on improving our timely compliance. So this is something that's very much to the credit of our colleagues. The green line, this is a line that's much more relevant for interpretation service. This is the number of meetings we have. And you can see that there's been quite impressive growth in meetings. So starting with your baseline at 2010, all the way by 2018, 2019, we were at 138, almost 140% increase in meetings. And this was a big challenge. And of course, this is something that you're all familiar with because many of you were in the booth supporting those meetings. What we see is in 2020 is that those meetings fell off quite substantially. And this is a function of the lack of infrastructure. Also, in terms of documents, so the navy blue line is showing that even though the number of meetings increased, what we saw is the documentation actually decreased slightly. So it's not a huge decrease, but it's almost 15%. what's interesting is you can also see that the budget, the red line is the budget that we had in 2010 as our base. Well, at 2020, it was 94% of that. It was a 6% reduction over time. So this is very much, though, a credit to the team because we were able to support more meetings, issue documents on time, admittedly slightly fewer documents with the reduction in budget. So this just gives a sense of the evolution. We're going to see how this changes with the return to normal. This is going to be an interesting, but this just kind of gives you a sense of where everyone we've been. Next slide, please. So now just to get more specific into the interpretation service, I think it's useful to sort of see the overall sense of, well, how many people and what are they doing? So at this point, there's 100 staff members of the interpretation service, and there's 3 vacancies. Almost everybody in the service are P staff. There's very few GS staff. Almost everybody, 2/3 of the staff here have permanent contracts. Another third has continuing. Continuing is similar. There's slight differences. And then there's a very small number of people who have fixed term contracts. Those would be GS staff. Okay, next slide, please. Also interesting is to take a look at the gender balance. You can see that the majority of staff in the interpretation service are female, and the average age is 51. And this is not that different from how things are in the division overall. Let's go to the next slide. Actually, but just before, the gender distribution in the division you see is 45% male and 55% female. So actually IS is slightly more female than some of the other parts of the division. Next slide, please. One of the things that's become quite important recently is looking at the regional group, looking at the distribution of where people are from. Now, I think, as you may know, language posts and interpreter posts are designated as language posts are not subject to geographical requirements. However, the Secretary General, and supported by the Director General and USGD GACM, is quite concerned of having having adequate diversity within the group. Right now, the interpretation service is 58% from the Western European and others group. And then you can see smaller all the way down to the GRULAC group, which is down at 2 people for 1%. So this is something that we're being asked as managers to keep in mind when it comes to hiring. And I think it's particularly valuable that there's this new initiative, the Global Languages Roster, which is the idea, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's partly to help really bring in people from a broader community. Of course, everybody's going to be tested, etc., but it's just to really offer opportunities to people who might not have had them before. Next slide, please. So this is something that's, of course, of interest to people. We can see that we're going to have a lot of retirements in the next couple of years. This is important for a number of reasons. One, of course, it gives people opportunities for promotions, but it also shows that there's going to be some loss of knowledge and such in the service. So one of the things that we often look at is, okay, making sure that we can do knowledge transfer before people go. But this is a sense, and of course, if you're ever interested in exactly the details, which posts these are and such, we can provide information separately. Next slide. Actually, and before and you may have noticed that the D1 is retiring, so that's going to be a big loss for us. But she keeps saying she's going to go, so there it is. Okay, also interesting possibly is what's happening with the SHP. I think you've probably seen there's lots of broadcasts and information that the H building is open and they've moved a number of people in there. And as they've moved people into the H building, they've been closing down other parts of the house. So you can see, I don't know, this might be kind of difficult to see because the type is sort of small, but building S, that's being closed. Building D has already been closed. Parts of building C is going to be closed in October. That means that Marie and the team and the Interpreters Lounge will be moving. Building E is going to be the last one to be touched. Right now it's showing October 22. We'll see how that goes. We're having a discussion with SHP about where the division is going to be. There's been a lot of negotiation and discussion about that really for years. I mean, this is probably 5, 6, 7 years, but we're revisiting this to make sure that the final location is appropriate with what our work requirements and such are. At this point, I think interpretation is envisioned, if I remember correctly, Marie, I think it's section AB when the construction work is done. But you can see from the time frame that this is going to take quite a while. So some work is expected to be done in 2022, some things in 2023. Once they've completed the conferencing work in the old part of the building, is then the work is supposed to move to Building E. We're in a lot of really intense discussions with SHP to make sure that the condition of the conference rooms, once they're done being renovated, is appropriate for the current way we work. This, of course, is always complicated with construction because construction projects are a process. And a number of years ago, we had to establish this is what the design was going to be for the conference rooms. So that's what they're building to. Of course, things have changed, especially with hybrid, but we're very fortunate to have a close partnership with DOA and the colleagues in the Central Support Service. Marie and I participate in a working group every Wednesday morning. That's with Division of Administration, so that includes IT, as well as the audio-visual team. There's also somebody from procurement. We have Anna Banchieri there as well. And collectively, we sit and talk about, okay, where are things going with the conference rooms? What can we outfit? What can be outfitted with hybrid? What needs to be done? And what are the future plans? So this is something that we are really giving high priority to because the member states and our substantive secretariat colleagues want to have more meetings. Because if they don't have meetings, they're not doing their work. So we have, I guess we've really back with April, May, etc. of last year, DCM is really intensively engaged on this to make sure that things are moving. And I have to say, I really appreciate the colleagues in DOA who are very creative in the work that they've done on that. We're expecting to add a few more conference rooms. But there was discussions about having the conference rooms in Palais Wilson converted to add hybrid. If that does go through and there's many stakeholders, so we'll see, that probably wouldn't be finished until the end of this year. There's also discussions about adding Tempest. So right now in Tempest 2 has all the fancy cameras and such. Tempest 1 and 3 has a fixed camera. There's talking about upgrading that as well to continue to support hybrid. So those, if they come online, would probably be the end of the year. Colleagues in DOA have also procured equipment, and it's been difficult because there's an issue having to do with silicon chips and because everybody in the world wants to upgrade their conference services, their conferencing rooms. We're going to be upgrading room 21 probably in September, and room 24 and 25, if I remember correctly, I think as well as are also going to be upgraded so we can provide hybrid services there. Because again, this is with the pressure to have more meetings. Okay, I think I've gone on long enough on this slide. Let's take a look at the next one. So this is how things are going. We've just sent out, I think it was last week or the week before, a note verbal reflecting the changes that the Swiss announced at the end of May. So there's a lot of interest. As soon as the announcement came out from the Swiss, we heard from all the substantive secretariats, permanent missions. They wanted to know, okay, when are they going to come back to the meeting rooms? What we're working on, the assumption is, and all of this is very well coordinated with the International Geneva Medical Directors Group. So we here are continuing with 1.5 meter of physical distancing in the conference rooms. That's also continuing in the interpretation booth. So at this point, we are continuing, as you know, to have one person per booth. They're looking at putting plexiglass in some of the rooms, the room 21 through 27, to increase the capacity. At this point, especially after the closure of the assembly hall with the SHP, there's only four rooms that can accommodate the full 6 languages of interpretation. Now here we have ECE, we have treaty bodies, so many of them, ECE works in 3 languages, treaty bodies, sometimes 3, often 4. We're not like New York where every meeting has to have 6 languages, but this definitely limits our ability to provide what substantive secretariats want. The other thing is because of this 1.5 distancing, that means there are no rooms that can accommodate the full 186 member states that we have here. So this also is problematic because certain bodies are very concerned about having equal opportunity for every delegation. So what this means, though, is that we're continuing to have hybrid meetings. We are trying to encourage greater in-person participation because the more people who are speaking in the room, the less of a burden it is for interpretation staff who have to deal with remote participation. But certainly at this point, we cannot say that we are seeing the end of remote participation. We also are saying that no, because people were having limited in-person participation and because of health reasons, we continue to not take paper documents and paper statements. So this means that you'll continue to be serviced by the meeting support unit, the meeting room attendants. But that has its own challenges for them especially. We're still asking delegates to submit their documents electronically, and then the MRAs are printing those out. So, and as it says, as we want everybody to have a face mask, etc., in the room. There may be some additional changes, and as the Director General mentioned, as more and more people become vaccinated in Switzerland, it's likely that we may wind up following New York, where they may say, okay, we're not going to be doing physical distancing anymore. We'll see what happens with that. And of course, we're consulting, that'll all be consulted very closely with all the medical teams. Next slide, please. One thing I'd like to say is we are well aware that remote participation is often quite problematic. So in addition to the fact that just people you have transmission issues, you also have the fact that people are not, and I admit I'm sitting here myself without having a headset on, but we tell people if you're in a remote meeting, if you're doing remote participation for a multilingual meeting, there's a number of things that we're asking people to do. Many people don't do them. There are people who try to participate remotely, maybe they're calling from their car, etc. This creates poor audio, which creates problems for interpretation. One of the things that we did, this was in partnership with our colleagues in library. This is the Knowledge Commons group. So members of the interpretation service, this was Martin and Amy, I think Anne Tarnowski as well. I can't remember the other colleagues who were involved, put together an hour-long presentation. It was available in English and in French to sensitize delegates to say, hey, when you're participating remotely, you need to do these things. And it wasn't just here's the lecture. It really was, thank you. It really was specifically, okay, here's what happens if you have no background noise in your room. And I found it very effective. So you're watching and you see and somebody's trying to speak and you hear the lawnmower or the child so it's very effective. People would realize, oh, this is why this is a problem. So what we're doing is we're looking at how we can take some of the little videos that were put together and turn those into more communication products. There's also a follow-on from that where there's a group that's working together. There's also participation with New York on how we can have a comm strategy, how we can inform people. So partly to get better compliance. We're also talking about monitoring, and we're also trying to manage expectations and warn people to say, hey, if we can't hear you, we can't interpret you. Because if there's no consequences to non-compliance, then of course people will do what's easiest for them. This is still evolving, and this is something that also is going to be reflected. I think there's going to be more of a global effort on that because it's not really, we just can't say here in Geneva that we are going to stop interpretation every time X, Y, or Z, and if it doesn't happen elsewhere. So this is a global effort, and I appreciate everybody's participation in that. Next slide. So just to talk a bit about some of the challenges. So I've mentioned quite a bit about SHP. This is something I'm personally committed to this, and I'm really making it very clear what DCM's position is on a number of areas. And I'm personally pushing to make sure that the conference rooms are properly outfitted, that we don't try to close things too early. So you have my word that this is something I will stay engaged in. So this is all about business continuity, because if we can't provide meetings, then what are we doing? We need to plan for the return to work and in-person meetings. That's already going on now. My guess is about, as this Director General was saying, that's probably in the September timeframe. But even now, we're already bringing back meetings with some in-person participation. As I mentioned, we talked about supporting staff, and this includes, there's a whole range of activities on that. And I spoke a bit about the work we're doing with providing communications to meeting participants to try to get better compliance. We have to implement a new performance management system. I think everybody's already been through that. We'll see how that continues to evolve. We're talking about communicating effectively with clients and member states. This is partly all these outreach things. So we had the note for Ball, then we're going to have a briefing on Thursday. So we'll be providing that briefing to tell people, hey, this is what's going on, and give them a chance to ask questions. We do this regularly. We contribute to the Director General's talking points. I have meetings occasionally with the Swiss and others. So whenever I have a meeting, I try to make sure that I make all these points as well, including the need to have a mandate. And that, you know, hybrid meetings are certainly not a panacea, and they're not without cost. We want to make sure technology works for the division, that we're not just changing things or doing something new because it's cool, but it needs to be something that works for people and it makes sense. And then it's also very important, I believe, that we need to strengthen ties across the DGACM duty stations. So that's Vienna, Nairobi, New York. And then I think it's useful, of course, also connecting people across in Geneva. And I know that Marie communicates regularly with the head interpreters at other agencies and such. And this, again, when you go back to the Director General's, the Secretary General's vision, he mentions things such as partnership and technology and data. Next slide, please. So this is what we had been, some of the things I've already spoken about. I don't know, Marie, do you want to do this slide, or shall I go ahead and continue?
No, it's fine. I can do it. So here at UNOG, we will continue interpreting from the booth. So we are not going dispersed mode for all the reasons that you already know. So we will continue what we have been doing, and we'll be interpreting from the booth. The number of assignments will be 7. Duration of meetings, there will still be 2 hours with remote participation. And I told you during the service meetings that as of 5th of July, we are going with 3 hours meeting, and we are doubling the team. So we have 2 teams for 3 hours meeting, and all the secretariats, all of them has accepted. So all, you know, ECE, treaty bodies, everybody will have 3 hours meeting. Return to in-person meetings. So what will happen? So we are waiting for the Swiss to let us know what will happen. And if they do say that, you know, there will be no longer, you know, quarantine when you travel to Geneva, no longer social distancing in the meeting rooms and so, delegates will come back. And they will come back and they will ask for 3-hour meetings. But what might happen, we don't know yet, but we are pretty sure that this will happen, is that they will still be remote participants. So some participants will no longer travel, and we are sure that this is what's going to happen. So we will do what we were doing before COVID, i.e., if remote participation does not exceed 30 minutes, the meeting will be 3 hours. If it exceeds 30 minutes, then the meeting will be a 2 hours meeting. This is what we are going to do. And we have one secretariat, I don't remember which one it was, that said that what they would like to do, and I actually think it was a good idea, that what they would like to do is that they will time the remote participant. So if it's more than 30 minutes, the meeting will last 2 hours. After 2 hours, the chairman will say the meeting is over. If it's less than 30 minutes, then they will go on for 3 hours. This is what they are going to do. And occupational safety and health a priority. This is indeed a priority. As you know, we are already working with New York. This is why Farida Jelul from the medical service is here with us today. So if you have questions to ask, do not hesitate. She's here and she will be able to answer them. But we have listened to you, and we do know that there is an health issue going on. We are aware of it, and it's being discussed at the highest level in New York.
Thanks very much, Marie. Next slide, please. I think in the interest of time, we don't need to go into too much on this. EAPG, the system is changing. I don't know, Marie, do you have a couple points you want to make on this?
Yes, EAPG, basically, they are changing the system for 2 reasons. First of all, for the global language roster for interpreters, because they want EAPG to include all interpreters that are on the roster, which is not the case now, because now, for example, EAPG Geneva include only interpreters from Geneva, EAPG Vienna, only interpreters from Vienna, but they want EAPG to include interpreters interpreters that are on the global language roster. So this is the first change. The second change, they want to integrate EAPG with Umoja. So they call it EAPG 2.0. So when you ask for a leave in EAPG, it will be reflected automatically in Umoja. And regarding the global language roster for interpreters, I have talked about it during various service meeting, and there is nothing to add on that.
Okay, thanks so much. And I'll take this moment to thank Marie for her leadership on the global language roster, actually, since then she's really taken the lead to move that forward. So it's really impressive. Next slide, please. I mentioned a bit conferencing today and tomorrow. Basically, we're taking the work that was done in 2019, we're updating it, and we're reaching out to talk to people about what is it that they need in the context of post-COVID. What was good for hybrid? What do we want to keep? What do we not want to keep? What are the things we got rid of don't have to come back? I won't go on too long, but we are going to be, I'm going to try to hire somebody to actually run that, because it was run by Lisa Campbell before. So we'll have to find somebody to run the project, and then we'll be asking for volunteers for people to work on that, workshops, things like that. Next slide. One thing that's important just to remember in the context of the return to work, this is really not so much of an issue for people. Obviously, none of you were working from your home countries because everybody here works from the booth, but we are asking people to use annual leave. Just as a reminder, you need to use up the extra carryover days by December 31st. That means as of December 31st, you should have 60 days or less of annual leave. Anything more than 60 days will vanish. And again, if you're traveling abroad for leave, things like that, keep track, understand what the rules are, and you can continue. We do have 10 uncertified sick leaves. If you have any questions on any of these HR things, please pass them on to Gabriella. She can get a good answer for you. Okay, next slide. I think the next one is Q&A. Okay, so let's go ahead, and if people have questions, either put them in the chat or raise your hand. You can direct them, me, Marie, or Dr. Jewel. And again, I really appreciate Dr. Jewel being here to take questions. Okay, I see Olga first, and then Christina Ballas, followed by Claudia. Olga, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Kira, and thank you very much for this meeting. I have a question regarding your presentation. On the slide about achievements, it is mentioned that we serviced 1,257 meetings in 2020 with interpretation, and 46 were virtual or in hybrid format. But actually, for all I know, all the meetings that I serviced were either hybrid or virtual. So what about those 54% other meetings? In what format were they delivered?
Well, remember back there was January and February when we were all happily doing what we were doing, and then poof, in mid-March it all fell apart. So but it's really impressive when you see how many meetings we were having in that first 2.5 months, and then poof, there was nothing for another 2.5 months, and then it slowly came back. But that's where that is, because it is an odd stat.
Yes, it's true. I forgot January and February were still normal months. Sorry. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Christina.
Yeah. Can you see me? Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see and
yeah,
hear you.
Thank you.
And see you.
Well, thanks for holding this meeting. I wanted to make a comment on two issues. On the issue of what you referred to, and the Director General, as well as well-being and health. The word well-being was used in the context of the hybrid meetings, which were described as becoming the new normal, essentially. But I think, and though I appreciate the administration's concern for staff well-being, I think it's a little bit of a concern to describe the issues we've raised as being issues relating to well-being. They are issues relating to health, in fact. And if we use the term well-being, this places the problems we've encountered in a completely different framework. These are actually health issues. The poor audio that comes from remote connections is a health issue for us. It's not an issue of well-being. This means that there are considerations of a medical nature, of possibly insurance, and of accountability or responsibility of our employer to refrain from exposing us to a hazardous working environment. Our ears are our organs of perceptions, one of them. They're very important for us, not just to navigate in the world and to function, but in terms of our profession, they're also our working tool. So our ears must be protected from toxic sound. We have set aside the ISO standards which exist for audio quality for interpreters for the duration of the COVID, because we've all understood that it's an emergency, of course. These technologies are emerging technologies. People are not used to doing this. So we all understand that everyone's been involved in a process. We've all been on a learning curve, but there have been casualties in our profession. There are quite a number of colleagues who have had health impacts, fairly severe, involving physical pain or dysfunction, who are on medical leave, sometimes extended medical leave, and I don't imagine that's a good thing for the organization either. So I think if we are to adopt hybrid meetings as the new normal, then we have to make sure that we go back to ISO audio standards, and we have to make sure that people who are now connecting remotely, who are pleased that they don't have to go through the organizational trouble of booking trips and hotels and paying the price for all of that, that instead they divert those resources to ensuring that they have appropriate equipment and locations to connect so that they can comply with ISO audio standards. And though we've accepted the poor audio quality and tried to deal with it to the best of our abilities and suffered from it, we should not accept that as the new normal. If hybrid meetings become the new normal, they must comply with with ISO standards, and people must make the investments and the effort to be able to ensure that they can meet those standards, because otherwise it's completely unsustainable. We'll just have people, getting sick, we'll have people's health impaired. The other, so that's on the hybrid meetings. The next issue I wanted to raise is that of coming back to meetings in person and in relation to COVID. I was frankly quite shocked to hear of the measures that are being proposed, the 1.5 meter distancing and the idea of putting up plexiglass in booths. To me, this, not in booths, in the meeting.
No, the plexiglass in room 23 is in the room for the delegates, it's not in the booth.
But on this issue, what shocks me is not so much the measures, but the fact that underlying these proposals, it is clear that the hypothesis of transmission, the transmission model, is a completely outdated one. Plexiglass can only help if the model of transmission of COVID is by droplet, i.e., through coughing or sneezing, large droplets that are stopped by a physical barrier. This is not the way COVID is transmitted. This is now the consensus of all aerosol scientists. They have been working on this for over a year. COVID is transmitted through the air, through aerosols that can travel easily at distances over 1.5 meters, just like cigarette smoke. If you put up a plexiglass barrier next to a smoker, you're still gonna smell it. This is a virus. You can't smell it, but you can still get infected. So that virus can travel. I am shocked to see that these medical, I don't know who this medical consortium is or this group, is still operating on the basis of a completely outdated transmission model. If you don't have the correct transmission model, you cannot take the appropriate measures to prevent transmission. So I would say I'm against plexiglass, but what we need to understand is that since it is transmitted by air, we also have the information we need to take the appropriate preventive measures, which is to ensure that the air quality is good, that there is good ventilation. I raised this issue in a letter for the first time relating to ventilation in March 2020. I subsequently wrote another letter on raising this issue once again, and specifically arguing against plexiglass measures and in favor of the verification of the air quality for our purposes in the booth, but obviously in the meeting rooms as well for delegates. I had suggested at the time that we buy a CO2 device, a sensor, to test the air quality in different booths. That proposal was rejected, so I bought my own. And for the past few months, I have been when I was working in the booth, testing the air quality in the booths, the CO2 levels with my CO2 sensor. It's extremely variable. I was pleased to find booths where the ventilation is amazingly good, just slightly above ambient outdoors air. So really amazing. The best air quality that I've measured, and I've measured in supermarkets, at home, everywhere, is in room 17 in the booths. Amazing. However, there are some other booths where that is not the case. For example, in Tempus, first of all, it's a little bit tricky because you have to remember to switch the ventilation on. If you don't, and there's no indicator stating whether the ventilation is on or off, if you don't have it on, then it can easily go beyond 1,200 ppm for CO2. So I think that is what we need to look at. We need to ensure that the ventilation and the air qualities in any meeting rooms and in the booths is good. We can do away with these distancing measures. You can have people as close to or as far away as they can be. If the CO2 levels are above 1,000, they're still going to catch it from each other, even if they're at 3 meters or 4 meters away from each other. And no plexiglass, please. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much on that. Actually, I think that your points about the aerosol, I know there's been a lot of shifting on that, and I don't want to get into a debate on this because I'm not actually a specialist. I do know that the people who run HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and AC, we've passed these concerns on to them. And what I was told by them is that they have the ventilation system on as high as it goes. So, you know, sometimes they keep the ventilation relatively low because it's cheaper, because you don't have to reheat the outside air. But what I was told by Rosario, who I think is a pretty reasonable guy, was that they had jacked up the ventilation as much as possible. And I appreciate your point that the ventilation is variable, and I'll pass some of that back on to them. But that's good to know. But and you may recall that it was really cold. I found it was really cold over the winter, and this was partly because they kept pulling in it was outside air that it wasn't be able to heat as much. So I'll pass some of these things back on to them. I think there's some good points. I agree. The point about going back to ISO standards, we have raised this in the tendering. So we had the 3 systems, Interpify, Kudo, and Interactio. We did have that sort of abortive test with Kudo, which didn't work, so we ended up with Interpify. They're doing a new process, a new tendering process, and it's actually quite well along. We made the push, this is where in the group that Marie and I are in, we made the push and said, hey, put in the ISO standards. I think in the end it wasn't successful, but I can report that we pushed this, and I know that this was sent from Geneva to New York to tell them, hey, when you're doing this, please request this. I know that where we are with that, they've done the technical evaluation, and they're going to be actually doing, we're moving forward. I think there's about 6 companies who put that forward. That said, just given when you see how far things have gone from March of last year to where we are now, you know, when you look at Teams meetings, there's all kinds of sexy stuff that Teams couldn't do. So you may have seen that Teams meetings have captioning now. They're going to be moving forward with all sorts of advances on that. So personally, I'm guessing that some of these problems will be solved within a few years. Now, that doesn't help people who have to sit and listen right now in the booth. Okay, and I do, you know, my son has tinnitus. I mean, I know that this can be a big problem, that this is real. And I think I'd like to circle back to your point about calling it well-being is a bit, I mean, you didn't say glib, but there is kind of a sense of, hey, that's a little disingenuous. I think that's fair. And as Marie had said, we are really concerned about this. They're concerned here. And I know that the Undersecretary General in New York is concerned. And in fact, this issue about interpreter health was actually raised to the Secretary General at one of their senior management committee meetings. So this isn't just something where everyone's just giving you empty platitudes. People are concerned. Soon we should be getting a report from the occupational safety and health people. So when that comes out, we'll take a look at what the recommendations are, and we'll do our best to implement that. And also your point, which is echoing what the Director General had said, that since people who are participants don't have to pay for travel, etc., we are trying to, again, as I said, raise awareness, tell them, hey, you need to invest in this. And some of it is a little bit lighthearted. Some of it, though, is going to end up with some client compliance measures where we're going to say, okay, we just can't hear you. You can't be heard. So you're not going to be able to be interpreted. So these, I think you've made a lot of good points, and I hope I've taken them on board. Let's go, if it's okay, we'll switch now to Claudia, and then we'll take some of the questions that are in the chat. Claudia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kira. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for convening this meeting, and thank you so much to the DG as well for being here. And if I may add, it's been very comforting receiving her broadcast all along the pandemic, really. It's been very comforting. Not much to add to what Christina just said about the health issues. I think it goes well beyond well-being. But just out of curiosity, because the DG has said on several occasions that Geneva will become a center of excellence for hybrid meetings. And what we hear during our meetings from our clients doesn't match that. I think our clients, you know, the treaty bodies, the delegates from the Human Rights Council, the city, they all want to come back to the meeting room. So I'm just trying to understand who exactly is pushing for that, or for this, you know, small percentage of remote participation. And yeah, thank you. That's it for me. Thanks.
Excellent question. And, you know, I used to way back in the day, I was a delegate, so I know that the work isn't so much in the room. The work is when you're meeting with people on the side, when you see people for coffee, or when you see people in the halls. So those sorts of people are all super eager to get back, because the people who are posted here, they are here, they want to interact in the meetings, in the halls, in the periphery to move forward. The people who are interested in hybrid, there's a couple things that we've heard. One is, I was in a meeting where the president of the Human Rights Council, the ambassador from Fiji, was pointing out that a lot of her colleagues from small island states were actually able to participate in meetings, because before, to come from Tuvalu or Nuatu, you know, it can take them 3 days. Then they come and they're in a meeting for a short period and they have to go back. So for those kinds of people who wouldn't come, they're interested. It's like, hey, I can participate now because before we wouldn't have been able to. So there's going to be some outliers who are interested who maybe didn't have missions. One of the things I heard is that people had said there's higher level participation now. So for instance, whereas if you're going to say, you know, somebody, let's just say from the US delegation. So who are you trying to get? Well, maybe you get somebody who's like an assistant secretary or some such thing. But if you have just virtual participation, it may be easier to get higher level participation. I mean, I'm not going to go into whether it's better diplomatically or negotiation wise to have high level or low level. That's far beyond my brief. But so people are saying, okay, if we do remote, we can get a higher level participation. We get participation from people who never came before. And then some of the NGOs are also in the, hey, we don't have money for travel, so we want, this is a way for us to participate. So it's a lot of it is an access thing. So in this case, what I think we're going to wind up with is the delegations who are here will come back. They will all be meeting in person, and then you'll go back to having smaller interventions from a few people who have unusual cases. But it's going to be interesting. One of the things that the USG says in all of his talking points, and he's mentioned it to ACABQ and to CPC, what the approach is, he says, ultimately it will be up to the meeting organizer and its sponsors to determine the modalities of the meeting. So what this is, it's clear there is not going to be any big bang. Okay, now we have decided all meetings forevermore will be like this. So it's going to be, and we heard this at YEMLAP actually. That was also quite interesting. So YEMLAP was last week. So this was the experience of all the international organizations. And there is a sense that this allows much more of a bespoke approach to organizing meetings. Fabulous. You know, I mean, if we all could afford to go to a tailor and get our clothes made, we would. But of course, there's a reason it's very expensive because it's so much more work. So what we were talking about in YEMLAP, for instance, was how do we make this sustainable? Some of you may have participated in the UNFCCC meeting. Well, that was 5 in the morning to 10 p.m. We can't do that. We are not resourced to have people working all the time, not just, you know, IS, but also colleagues in Division of Administration. So everybody is struggling with how are we going to do this? How are we going to put the genie back in the bottle in a way? So those are some of the things we've heard. we're part of the discussion. That's partly what conferencing today and tomorrow is going to be, is to really talk to people. And what they had done last time is they did a lot of on-the-spot interviews. There were some workshops, but to capture a broader opinion, because often sometimes it's the people who feel strongly will speak up and you don't necessarily hear from others. So we're waiting to see what the lessons learned, benefits for some people, costs for others. I hope that answered the question.
And to complement that, you know, we don't know what will happen in 1 year, in 2 years. You know, maybe there will be no remote participant, everybody will be back. We don't know. But what I've noticed, I will give you an example. The AIC reclassification board. So it's a meeting that used to take place in my office. So when Lee was here, you know, for 20 years, the meeting is taking place at UNOG. There's the chief interpreter ILO, you know, WHO. So we have 5 people around the room, and the other send proxy. So this is the way the meeting has been going on. Since the beginning of COVID, the meeting is taking place on Teams, so everybody's participating. The chief interpreter of UNESCO, FAO, New York, Vienna, everybody's participating. And last time when the 3 said, okay, you can now meet in the garden, so I said, okay, you know what? We are going back to what we used to do. I'm tired of Teams. Let's go into the garden and let's do the meeting. So now me, the WHO, ILO, WIPO, usually the 4 of us or 5. And the chief interpreter of WHO said, okay, so why don't you come to my garden? It's only the 4 or 5 of us. So fine, so we all organized to go to Tufik Garden. There was no way of doing it. They all got upset. The chief interpreter of FAO, UNESCO said, well, no, we need to participate. We need, you know, they never participated in 20 years. No, all of a sudden, you know, so we did it on Teams. So that's the way the meeting is going to take place, on Teams, because now, you know, they've done it for 1 year during COVID and they want to continue doing it. So is this, I'm going to push again because, you know, I will prefer to be into a fixed garden or somewhere. But what I'm trying to say is we don't know. So we are thinking that some people will intervene remotely. Maybe it's not the case. Maybe people will say, you know what, I want to travel. And that will be the end of it. But we, you know, before COVID, we had the problem with video conferences. So, you know, so it will replace in a way video conferences or something like this.
Yeah. And it really, we don't know what's going to fall out. We don't know how fast the technology is going to move. You know, some people, if you look on some of these futuristic things, you know, there's different types of hybrid meetings that are even more like virtual presence and things. So I don't know. I think what we do know is 5 years is going to look very different from today. How it's going to evolve, we'll have to see. Let me take some of the questions onto the side. This is an excellent question from Alma. Maybe we could ask Aiko from our nurse from medical service. Is the medical service open for walk-in service? So the question is, what should I do when I leave the booth with a splitting headache and cannot service a second meeting that day? So this is a good question. Maybe Aiko, if you're still online, if you could give us some guidance on that.
Yes. Walk-in clinic is still we are on discussion, but for the emergency we are taking all the time. As you know, we moved. I mean, we are trying to move for the other place. It's over Safi, and still even set up the computer yet. So a couple of days it will be very difficult, but we are of course discussing when to start, and this is not only us to say, and we have to a little bit discuss a little bit further. But in case of the emergency, we always react, we always accept, but it's always better to call us first. And the telephone consultation, we always doing as usual from 8 to 5. And nurse is taking the phone, and we can at least tell you what to do. This is all what I can say right now, but whatever it comes next, we will just broadcast what is our stage now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Aiko. So when the broadcast comes out, of course, that will be available on by email. And then at that point, as always, the front office team will know what's going on. So if you have questions that you can ask them. Next point is something about the Human Rights Council and having, Human Rights Council. Millions of speakers jamming themselves into a small slot. 15 speakers, 20-minute slot. This is an excellent point about the switching cost. So right now, if people are in a room, they just push the button and then a little red light comes on, blah, 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 and then they talk too fast. then now what we're having is people are on hybrid meetings and they're like, what? I can't do this. I can't. So I get that. Hopefully some of this is is being improved over time, because one of the things I found is the evolution of people's technological comfort levels is better. So at this point, there's not as much of what button do I push, but I know that's still there. This is part of our outreach program. One of the things that we did here, this was in the meeting I had with the Deputy High Commissioner, and she was saying that they would appreciate having some sort of training or onboarding. So for when you have sessions where there's a number of people, so for instance, like a treaty body session where you have the same experts maybe, they said they were open to having some training with people to make sure they knew how to use the platform. So we need to follow up on that. Let me make a little note. And that would be in conjunction. Maybe, Marie, we can talk about it tomorrow at the hybrid meeting. But the substantive secretariats are aware of that. So this is something we are trying to update the checklist information and onboarding information and things like that. But there's nothing really that substitutes having somebody online hand that out. So that's a good point.
And Kira, during the meeting with the secretariat that I think it's on Thursday, because there is another comment about the speeches, the written speeches. So maybe we can add that to the talking point, to the secretariat or to the PowerPoint.
Yep, no, absolutely, excellent point. So we'll put that in the presentation, and we also, though, I think next time we do a note verbal, maybe Muge, you could make a note. The next time there's a note verbal, we could remind people of the importance for that. And then the last question is from Mohammed Ben Said. What is the legal value of decisions taken in hybrid or virtual meetings in the UN? This is a function of the rules of procedure for each body, as I understand it. And I believe that they update that themselves. So if, and again, I'm just speculating, but because I haven't really looked into it in detail, but my understanding is if the body makes some sort of agreement that, all right, when we meet in such and such a way, we will handle things this and that, there's silent procedure, there's different things. So bodies have had to address that. And I heard mention it, somebody at YEMLAP was saying that their particular entity had to go through and update all their rules of procedures, which they hadn't touched for like 30 years and still had reference to teleaxes and all that other sorts of thing. So this is really up to the bodies to decide, but they and the substantive secretariats are very seized with that. And this is one of the reasons when the Human Rights Council went virtual in March, there was a big question, how were they going to vote? Because of course, voting is super important for the resolutions. And there was also, how are we going to run resolutions? How are we going to have informals? So they worked something out and they got agreement on that, and it went pretty well. Now I see another question from Anna. If training sessions on remote are organized for delegates, could we have a pool of volunteers? Excellent. First of all, love the word volunteer. Second of all, but yeah, this would be an excellent idea, because you are the people. First of all, delegates know your voices. They've been hearing your voices for years. I mean, I know when I sit and listen, there are certain people in the English booth, I know those voices, and it's very comforting when I listen to English interpretation. So I think this is if people are willing to volunteer for that, and of course in all languages. I had a meeting with somebody from the DPR from the Spanish mission, and he made the point about multilingualism and said, hey, we understand business continuity and that this has been a challenge, but we want to get back to having all of the languages. So if we have people who are willing to volunteer in a number of languages, that would really be great. I'll have to figure out how we would organize that. I know that right now there's a group that is working on this. It's Martin and Amy and was Olga in that as well, but so a couple other people. But maybe Marie, we can follow up on that.
Yep.
And then last question, let's see here. Guidance says, would it be possible to include in the notes for the chair of the HRC a request for, oh yes, to speak at a reasonable pace and give speeches to the secretariat. Excellent reminder. We can pass this back to MMS and ask them to pass that to the HRC as well. That's good. Okay. Oh, and Gabriella has posted in the chat the number you need to call for if there's health issues. So 727-2807 is the extension. Okay, thanks, Olga, for the names of the people working on that. So those are the questions in terms of if you have health issues. I also understand that there's some sort of tracking system you keep. That's super important to include the you know, just to keep track of what's really going on, because, you know, actual data, we're back to data. Data is more important than just anecdotal evidence. You know, I heard, I know somebody, that kind of thing. So I've certainly gone on far too long. I don't see any other questions. I hope we've addressed everything on the side. Anything else? All right, well, let me thank you very much for your time and your attention. Also, thanks to those of you who came to the party yesterday. That was certainly a pleasure. We're trying to decide whether we're going to do another event, possibly the end of August, beginning of September, to welcome people back, sort of a rentree kind of thing. We will see. Of course, the DCM Christmas party is legendary. So, but thank you for people coming to this today. Again, if you have questions, if you have concerns, it's always better to put them forward and ask. You know, I know it really is a challenging time, and I think it will continue to be challenging, especially given the ongoing remote participation. But we're hoping to see what we can do to ameliorate that from different directions. So again, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Kira. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
All right, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.